The ancient savanna stretches endlessly under a blood-red dawn. Silence. Then a bone-chilling roar splits the air. 6 million years ago, when the world was a savage theater of death and survival, something extraordinary happened in the heart of prehistoric Africa. A creature, neither fully ape nor human, would face the ultimate test. Armed with nothing but primitive instincts and a mother's desperate love, she would confront the apex predator of her time, the saber-toothed tiger. Another roar, closer now. The grass trembles. This is the story of courage in its rawest form. A tale forgotten by time, buried beneath millennia of dust and bone. Tonight, we unearth the truth of what happened when our ancient ancestor chose to fight rather than flee. The hunt was about to begin. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the acacia trees like golden spears, casting long shadows across the African plains. The air was thick with the scent of dew-soaked earth and the distant musk of predators. This was a world where death lurked behind every boulder, every thicket of grass. She was a female Homo habilis, though she bore little resemblance to the humans who would walk these lands millions of years later. Her name was lost to time, but her story would echo through the ages. Standing barely 4 feet tall, her muscular frame was built for survival. Dark fur covered most of her body, and her eyes held an intelligence that separated her from the mere beasts around her. The morning ritual began as it always did. She emerged from the rocky outcropping, where her small family sought shelter each night, scanning the horizon with practiced caution. Her mate had left before dawn to scavenge for roots and insects. Her 2 offspring, barely more than infants, clung to the shadows of their makeshift shelter. "Stay quiet," she grunted softly to them, her voice a mixture of human-like sounds and primitive clicks that only they could understand. The day hunters wake soon. The savannah was already alive with danger. In the distance, a pack of primitive wolves emerged from behind a cluster of rocks, their eyes reflecting the morning light like tiny suns. Overhead, massive birds of prey circled with wings that could blot out the sun. This was not a world for the weak. She had survived 23 seasons ancient by the standards of her time. Each scar on her weathered hands told a story of survival. The claw marks from fighting off a leopard, the bite mark from a snake that had cost her 2 fingers, but not her life. She had learned that in this world, hesitation meant death. But something was different about this morning. The usual sounds of the savannah, the chattering of baboons, the distant trumpet of ancient elephants were absent. An unnatural silence had settled over the land like a funeral shroud. She sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring. There was something else carried on the morning breeze. Something that made her blood run cold and her maternal instincts scream with alarm. The scent of the great cat. Saber-toothed tigers had been the nightmare of her people for generations. Stories passed down through grunts and gestures spoke of their terrible power cats as large as modern lions, but armed with fangs like curved daggers that could pierce bone and crush skulls with a single bite. Her heart began to race as she caught sight of massive paw prints in the soft earth near their shelter. Fresh prints. The beast had been here during the night, circling their home while they slept, perhaps deciding whether they were worth the hunt. One of her offspring, the smaller one, whimpered softly from the shadows. The sound cut through her like a stone blade. In that moment, every maternal instinct she possessed roared to life. She would not let harm come to her young. Not today, not ever. But as she prepared to gather her children and flee deeper into the rocky terrain, a low rumble echoed across the plains. The sound seemed to emerge from the very earth itself, deep and threatening. Then she saw it, a massive shadow moving through the tall grass not 50 meters away. The hunt had already begun, and they were the prey. The shadow moved like liquid death through the golden savanna grass. Each step was calculated, silent, perfect. The saber-toothed tiger was a masterpiece of evolutionary design, over 400 pounds of muscle, bone and killing intent wrapped in a tawny coat marked with dark rosettes. She pressed herself against the rocky wall of their shelter, pulling her two offspring deeper into the shadows. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she feared the predator might hear it. The smaller of her children, barely able to walk, began to whimper again. She breathed, placing a calloused hand over the infant's mouth. The gesture was gentle but desperate. One sound, one moment of carelessness, and they would all die. The great cat paused in its approach, raising its massive head to test the wind. Its saber-teeth 8 inches of bone-white death caught the morning light. Those fangs were designed for one purpose: to punch through the thick hide and heavy bones of prehistoric megafauna. A creature like her would pose no challenge whatsoever. But she had advantages the cat didn't expect. Years of survival had taught her to think beyond mere instinct. While other creatures of her time relied purely on strength or speed, she had learned to use tools, to plan, to anticipate. Her hands, freed from the task of walking, had become instruments of survival. She glanced around their shelter with desperate calculation. A pile of sharp stones lay near the entrance tools her mate had been crafting for hunting. A long piece of hardwood, fire-sharpened to a point, leaned against the rock wall. These were her weapons, but would they be enough? The tiger moved closer, its powerful shoulders rolling beneath its coat with each step. It knew they were here. Their scent was too strong to hide. The only question was whether it would attack immediately or continue to toy with them. Her older offspring, barely 3 seasons old, but already showing signs of intelligence, seemed to understand the gravity of their situation. The child clutched a small rock in tiny hands, mimicking the tool use behaviors learned from watching the adults. Such a small gesture, yet it represented millions of years of evolution, the spark of human ingenuity in its most primitive form. The predator was close enough now that she could hear its breathing deep, steady, confident. It knew it had them trapped. The rocky outcropping that served as their shelter had only one entrance, and the cat was positioned directly in front of it. Then the wind shifted. For just a moment, the breeze carried their scent away from the tiger and brought a new smell to her sensitive nostrils. The musk of her mate, still distant but approaching. He was returning from his morning forage, completely unaware of the death that waited in the grass. The realization hit her like a physical blow. If he continued on his current path, he would walk directly into the predator's ambush. The tiger would have an easy kill, and then turn its attention to her and the children. She had to make a choice that would define the next 1,000,000 years of human evolution. She could remain hidden, pray that somehow the cat would lose interest and move on. Let her mate face the beast alone while she protected the young. It was the logical choice, the safe choice. Or she could act. The tiger's muscles tensed. It had made its decision and was preparing to spring. In seconds, it would launch itself toward their shelter with killing speed. She gripped the fire-hardened spear with trembling hands and stepped out of the shadows. The great cat's yellow eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, predator and prey regarded each other across the space that separated them. In that instant, something fundamental shifted in the ancient world. For the first time in history, a human ancestor would not simply run or hide. She would fight. The moment she stepped from the shadows, the world seemed to hold its breath. The saber-toothed tiger froze, its massive head tilting slightly as if trying to process this unexpected development. In its experience, prey animals ran or cowered when confronted. They didn't step forward with weapons in hand and challenge death itself. But she was no ordinary prey animal. "Come then," she whispered in her primitive language, though the words carried a meaning that transcended speech. Her stance was low, balanced, the sharpened spear held at an angle that would allow for both defense and attack. "Come and taste what it means to hunt my kind." The tiger's lips pulled back in a silent snarl. revealing not just the famous saber teeth but rows of smaller, razor-sharp fangs designed for gripping and tearing. Its tail lashed once, twice, like a furry whip marking time before the kill. Behind her, she could hear her children's terrified breathing. The smaller one had stopped whimpering, as if even at such a young age it understood that silence might mean the difference between life and death. The older child clutched its small rock, ready to defend its sibling if the unthinkable happened. The first lunge came without warning. 400 pounds of muscle and fury exploded from the grass with the speed of lightning. The tiger covered the distance between them in a single bound, claws extended, jaws agape to deliver the killing bite. But she was already moving. Millions of years of evolution had given her kind something unique, the ability to plan, to anticipate, to think beyond the immediate moment. While the cat relied on overwhelming force and speed, she relied on intelligence and desperation. She rolled to the side, just as the tiger's claws raked the air where she had stood. The spear thrust upward, catching the beast along its ribs. The fire-hardened point penetrated fur and hide, but failed to reach anything vital. Still, the cat roared in pain and surprise as it landed heavily, stumbling slightly from the unexpected wound. First blood to the human. The tiger spun with liquid grace, faster than anything that large had any right to move. Its massive paws swept toward her head with enough force to crush her skull like an eggshell. She ducked, feeling the wind from the blow ruffle her hair, and jabbed again with the spear. This time the cat was ready. It caught the wooden shaft in its jaws, and those terrible saber teeth sheared through the hardwood like it was grass. Her primary weapon was gone, destroyed in an instant, but she was far from finished. As the tiger shook the broken spear from its mouth, she snatched one of the sharp stones from the ground near their shelter. Her ancestors had been crafting tools for hundreds of thousands of years, and she knew how to make even the crudest implement into a weapon. The stone flew from her hand with practiced accuracy, striking the great cat squarely in the left eye. The tiger reared back, pawing at its injured face, and she used the moment to create distance between them. "That's right," she snarled, backing toward a cluster of jagged rocks that might provide some protection. "We're not the prey you expected, are we?" But the tiger was learning too. Pain had made it cautious, and caution made it deadlier. Instead of charging again, it began to circle, looking for an opening, waiting for her to make a mistake. The dance of death had begun in earnest. She kept the rocks at her back, never taking her eyes off the predator. Each time it feinted left or right, she mirrored its movement. Each time it showed signs of preparing to pounce, she readied another stone or adjusted her position. They were locked in a ballet as old as life itself, predator and prey testing each other, looking for weakness, for that one fatal moment of inattention. But time was not on her side. The tiger was built for this kind of sustained combat. She was not. Already her breathing was becoming labored, her movements a fraction slower. Soon exhaustion would claim her, and then the beast would finish what it had started. In the distance, she could see her mate approaching through the tall grass, still unaware of the drama unfolding at their home. He carried a bundle of roots and what looked like a small lizard, the fruits of his morning's work. Food that would now never reach their children's mouths. The tiger noticed her momentary distraction and seized its chance. With a roar that seemed to shake the very earth, it launched itself forward in a final, killing rush. Time slowed to a crawl as 400 pounds of saber-toothed death hurtled through the air toward her. She could see every detail with crystal clarity, the way the tiger's muscles bunched beneath its coat, the saliva dripping from those terrible fangs, the cold intelligence in its remaining good eye. There was nowhere to run. The rocks behind her blocked any retreat, and the cat's leap would carry it directly into her path, no matter which way she dodged. This was the moment every nightmare was born from, when all the planning, all the courage, All the desperate love for her offspring came down to a single instant of action. But in that frozen moment, something extraordinary happened. Her mind, pushed beyond the limits of terror and desperation, made connections that would define the future of human evolution. She saw not just the immediate threat, but the trajectory of the tiger's leap, the angle of its approach, the precise moment when it would be most vulnerable. And she acted with the calculating precision that would one day build cities and reach for the stars. Instead of trying to dodge the unstoppable force of the tiger's attack, she moved toward it. As the beast reached the apex of its leap, claws extended and jaws agape, she threw herself directly into its path, but not to meet death, to deliver it. The sharp stone in her hand, held like a dagger, drove upward with all the strength her desperate love could provide. The tiger, committed to its attack trajectory, could not alter course. The primitive blade, crafted by intelligent hands and guided by a mother's fury, found its mark. The stone punched through fur, hide, and muscle to pierce the great cat's heart. The collision sent them both sprawling across the rocky ground. The tiger's weight crashed down on her, driving the breath from her lungs and sending waves of agony through her battered body. For a terrifying moment, she thought the beast might still have enough life left to finish her. But the light was already fading from its eyes. With tremendous effort, she pushed the massive carcass off her chest and rolled away, gasping for air. Blood, both hers and the tiger's, soaked into the ancient earth. She had cuts along her arms and back from the cat's claws, and her right shoulder felt like it was on fire, but she was alive. More importantly, her children were alive. From the shelter came the sound of movement, her offspring emerging from the shadows now that the terrible roars and struggle had ended. The older child approached cautiously, still clutching at small rock, while the younger one remained hidden but was no longer whimpering. "Safe," she whispered to them, the word barely audible through her damaged throat. "You are safe now." Her mate appeared at that moment, running through the tall grass with panic etched across his features. He had heard the roars, had seen the signs of struggle, and feared the worst. When he saw her standing over the body of the great cat, his expression shifted from terror to amazement to something approaching reverence. No member of their kind had ever killed a saber-toothed tiger in single combat. Such a feat was the stuff of impossible dreams, the kind of story that would be passed down through countless generations. But as she stood there, swaying slightly from exhaustion and blood loss, she wasn't thinking about legend or history. She was thinking about her children, about the fact that they would see another sunset, about the simple miracle of survival in a world that offered no guarantees. The tiger's body lay still in the morning sun, its saber teeth no longer a threat but merely curiosities, tools of a predator that had met something even more dangerous than itself. Intelligence, planning, and the unstoppable force of a parent's love. But their ordeal was far from over. The scent of blood would attract other predators, and she was in no condition for another fight. They needed to move, to find safety, to tend to her wounds before infection set in. As her mate helped her gather their few possessions, she took one last look at the fallen tiger. Something about its death felt like more than just survival. It felt like the end of one age and the beginning of another. Though she couldn't know it, she was right. The morning sun climbed higher, turning the African savanna into a furnace of gold and shadow. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the air, mixing with the acrid smell of the tiger's musk and her own sweat-soaked fear. She knew they had only minutes before every scavenger and predator within miles would come to investigate. Her mate worked quickly, gathering their primitive tools and the few possessions that meant the difference between survival and death in this harsh world. His movements were efficient, but his eyes kept returning to the massive carcass of the saber-toothed tiger, as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened. How? He asked in their simple language, his voice filled with awe and confusion. She looked down at her hands, still stained with the great cat's blood, still trembling slightly from the aftermath of battle. How indeed? She had acted on pure instinct, driven by something deeper than thought or reason. The need to protect her young had awakened something in her that transcended the normal limitations of her kind. "It was killing us," she replied simply. "So I killed it first." But even as she spoke, she knew it was more than that. In the moment of the tiger's attack, she had experienced something revolutionary, the ability to see multiple steps ahead, to plan beyond the immediate present, to use her intelligence as a weapon more deadly than claws or fangs. Her older offspring approached the tiger's corpse with the fearless curiosity of the very young. The child reached out to touch one of the massive saber teeth, then looked up at her with something approaching understanding. "Big Bad," the child said in their primitive speech. Mama stopped Big Bad. Yes, she thought. Mama stopped the Big Bad. But at what cost? Her wounds were deeper than she had initially realized. The tiger's claws had raked across her back and arms, leaving gashes that would need immediate attention. Her right shoulder had been dislocated in the collision, and every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her battered body. More concerning was the way the world seemed to blur at the edges whenever she moved too quickly. She was losing blood, and in their harsh environment, weakness was a death sentence almost as certain as the tiger's fangs would have been. "We must go," her mate urged, glancing nervously at the horizon. "The smell will bring others." He was right. Already she could see dark shapes circling overhead vultures and their massive prehistoric cousins, drawn by the promise of carrion. On the ground, the rustling of grass in the distance suggested that ground-based scavengers were also closing in. But as they prepared to leave their shelter, she found herself reluctant to abandon the tiger's body. Not out of sentiment, but out of practicality. The great cat represented a fortune in meat, hide, bone, and other materials that could sustain them for many days. To leave it all for the scavengers seemed like a terrible waste. "Help me," she said to her mate, gesturing toward the carcass. "We take what we can carry." Together, they used their crude stone tools to hack away strips of meat from the tiger's flanks. The work was exhausting in her weakened condition, but the protein would be invaluable for her recovery. The great cat's thick hide could be fashioned into better clothing and shelter materials. Even the bones could be carved into tools and weapons. As they worked, her children watched with fascination. This was their first real lesson in the harsh mathematics of survival-death feeding life, predator becoming prey, the endless cycle that drove their world forward. But time was running out. The distant sound of hyenas laughing carried across the savannah, and the vultures were growing bolder, landing just outside their immediate vicinity. Soon the scavengers would overcome their caution and move in to claim their prize. "Enough," her mate said, shouldering a heavy pack of tiger meat. "We go now, or we don't go at all." She nodded reluctantly, taking one last strip of the precious meat before gathering her children. The younger one she carried in her arms, despite the agony it caused her injured shoulder. The older child walked beside them, still clutching that small rock, a symbol of their kind's growing mastery over their environment. As they left their shelter for the last time, she looked back at the scene of her triumph. The tiger's body was already being investigated by a bold hyena that had crept close while they worked. Soon there would be nothing left but bones scattered across the ancient earth. But the story would survive. The tale of the female who faced down death itself to protect her young would be passed from generation to generation, growing in the telling until it became legend. What she couldn't know was that her victory represented something far more significant than a single act of courage. It was the moment when humanity's ancestors proved they were no longer just another species struggling for survival. They were the species that would one day rule the world. But first, they had to make it through the next few hours alive. 3 days had passed since the battle, and they had traveled far from the scene of her triumph. The rocky outcropping where she had faced death itself was now just a memory on the horizon, but its significance would echo through the ages. She sat in the shade of a baobab tree, its massive trunk offering blessed relief from the relentless African sun. Her wounds were healing slowly. Her mate had packed them with medicinal clay and bound them with strips of hide. The pain was manageable now, a constant reminder of what she had endured and overcome. More importantly, her children were thriving. The meat from the saber-toothed tiger had provided them with more protein than they had seen in months. Her offspring showed the benefits immediately: brighter eyes, stronger movements, more active play and exploration. The younger one had even taken its first independent steps, tottering between her and her mate with the determined courage that seemed to run in their bloodline. But the real changes went deeper than physical nourishment. Her older child had become fascinated with the small rock that had been carried during their flight from the tiger. What had started as a simple tool for throwing had evolved into something more. The child would chip at it with other stones, shaping it, improving it, turning it into something more effective. Tool-making, problem-solving, abstract thought about future needs. She watched with growing amazement as her offspring demonstrated cognitive abilities that seemed to exceed even her own. It was as if the trauma and triumph of their encounter with the great cat had awakened something profound in all of them. A new level of consciousness, a deeper understanding of their place in the world. "Look," her mate said, pointing to a set of tracks in the soft earth nearby. "Lion Pride passed here yesterday." She studied the prints with the eye of an expert tracker. 5 adults, at least 3 juveniles. A formidable group that would normally send her family scurrying for the nearest defensible position. But something had changed in her response to such threats. Instead of immediate fear, she felt a calculating assessment of risks and opportunities. The lions were powerful, yes, but they were also predictable. They hunted in patterns, had weaknesses that could be exploited, vulnerabilities that intelligence could overcome. "Let them come," she said quietly, her voice carrying a confidence that surprised even her. Her mate stared at her in amazement. These were the words of someone who had never known defeat, never experienced the crushing weight of superior predators. But she had defeated the ultimate predator, had proven that intelligence and courage could triumph over raw power. She was no longer the same creature who had cowered in rocky shelters and fled from every sign of danger. As evening approached, they prepared their simple camp with the efficiency born of long practice. But tonight felt different. Instead of the usual nervous vigilance that accompanied every sunset in the African wilderness, there was something approaching confidence. They had fire, a recent innovation that had revolutionized their lives. They had tools, both crude and sophisticated. They had knowledge passed down through generations and hard-won wisdom from their own experiences. Most importantly, they had proven that they were no longer at the mercy of their environment. Her children fell asleep to the sound of her voice telling the story of the great battle. Each night she would recount the events, adding details, emphasizing the lessons learned. How intelligence could overcome brute force. How courage could triumph over overwhelming odds. How the love of family could provide strength beyond anything evolution had programmed into their genes. These stories would be passed down through countless generations, growing and changing with each telling. The female who killed the saber-toothed tiger would become legend, then myth, then the foundational story of a species that refused to be prey. As she settled down for the night, her mate keeping watch while the fire crackled softly, she reflected on what had changed in their world. Not just their immediate circumstances, but something more fundamental. For millions of years, their ancestors had lived at the mercy of predators, always running, always hiding, always one step away from extinction. But 3 days ago, that ancient contract had been broken. They were no longer just another species struggling to survive. They were the species that would one day walk among the stars. In the distance, a lion roared, a sound that had once filled her with paralyzing terror. Now she merely opened one eye, assessed the distance and direction of the sound, and went back to sleep. Let them roar. Her kind had found something more powerful than fangs or claws. They had found the courage to fight back. And in a world where only the strong survived, that courage would prove to be the most valuable evolutionary adaptation of all. The age of humanity had begun, written in blood and bone on the ancient African plains. In the moment, a mother chose love over fear and intelligence over instinct. The saber-toothed tigers were extinct. Her lineage would inherit the earth.